Welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. My name is Joe LaPiccolo, your host for this week's newsletter. Gee, we have a real interesting show coming up. We have a real West End legend, Matt Hughes, better known as Captain Hughes, who many, many years ago started Charles River Cruises, which they had cruises along the Charles River, and then later on Boston Harbor Cruises. And Matt has a really great story to tell us. Welcome, Matt. How are you today?
Very good, Joe. Very good.
Geez, we're pleased to have you. You're a really West End legend here.
I enjoy being invited, huh?
And tell us, you're the oldest licensed captain in the East Coast?
I am the oldest licensed captain in the East Coast. My first license was issued on July 25th, 1926. I have renewed it every 5 years, and I am now, as records prove, I seem to be the oldest active licensed captain on the East Coast.
And maybe even the United States?
Maybe, could be.
So that's wonderful. How old are you, Matt?
82.
God bless you.
Yeah.
You look marvelous.
Yeah.
That's all the tough years you had on the water, huh?
Well, they're all enjoyable years. I loved every minute of it.
Mm-hmm. And you lived in what street did you live on?
I lived on Auburn Street, and then up to Chambers Street.
Mm-hmm. And
we originally, my father was born on the West End. He was born on Charles Street. He was born in the Anderson block, which
that was a famous block, sure.
There was an old block before the Stearns block was built. The Anderson block stood there, and it included even the new Peabody house.
Sure.
And then my father tells me, I don't remember the Anderson block. Matter of fact, George Lanigan was the last person born in the Anderson block before it was demolished.
Everybody knows George T. Lanigan.
George T. Lanigan, yeah.
Yeah. And you lived on Auburn Street, and then you moved to
Auburn Street, then the Chambers Street.
Okay. And what year did you start your
the boat?
Yeah, boat.
I started on the Charles River in 1919 as a little kid, bailing out rowboats for Gib Farrell, who owned what is later known as Watsy's Boathouse.
That was a famous place too.
That was a famous place. When Watsy was a retired milkman who decided he wanted to get in the boat business in his old age, and he bought the place from Gib Farrell.
And where was that located?
That was at the foot of Allen Street.
Right on the
Charles River. Right on the Charles River. There, as a matter of fact, there's a couple of tugboats tied up there now where Watsy's Boathouse used to be.
That's right across from the Mass Ioneer, right on Charles Street.
Yeah.
There's a pool there now.
Yeah, there's a pool there. Yeah, right. Jolie's pool is there. And right opposite where the Ioneer was a hut owned by St. Joseph's Church. It used to be St. Joseph's Boathouse.
You're kidding?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
They used to keep a shell in there. And my father rode for St. Joseph's.
They were active on the Charles River, St. Joseph's Church?
They were up till until they built the dam, which would have been about 1912.
Boy, I've talked to a lot of West Enders, and this is the first I'm hearing about this. This is really interesting.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when we were kids, we used to play basketball in the hut. It was, plus that we used to have movies there every Saturday.
Oh, that's great. And when you first started your cruises, how many boats did you have?
I had one little boat.
And then how did it grow?
It grew that now today we operate a fleet of 11 boats.
And you're known as Boston Harbor Cruises.
Boston Harbor Cruises.
Great.
We gave up the Charles River in 1962 because the business was falling off. Most of our clientele came from the West End, and it was a night business on the Charles River. People come down at night to get out of the hot tenements and take a boat ride. In 1962, we finally gave up the ghost on the river. My brother Larry was my last boat up there. But I'd really get moved. I moved down to the Boston Harbor area right after World War II.
I have a picture of one of your old boats there. We'll show a shot of that.
That is the Lobo. We used that for breaking ice on the Charles River. That's a picture of us breaking ice.
You had the contract there?
We had the contract for 5 different years. That picture was taken maybe in 1959, possibly.
Oh, great. Tell me something. We were discussing this earlier. How much did you charge for when you first started?
When we first started, we used to charge 10 cents for a 25-minute ride. We called it a trip around the basin. That's what our sign read, trip around the basin, 10 cents.
I remember going on that ride myself when I was a kid. That was a great ride.
It was a great ride, yeah. Yeah, we first started, that was before they filled in the Charles River.
Mm-hmm.
When we first started, the granite wall that you see now at the community boating, that wall ran the full length of the river,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to Harvard Bridge, and ran down to the dam.
And you have some unusual names for some of your boats. Uncle Sam, was that?
Uncle Sam was one of my boats. The other one was the Elk. Another one was the Flowing Ruby. The Nellie was my first boat.
Where did you get that name?
That came with the boat.
Okay.
And it was cheaper to leave the name on than was to buy new letters
Mm-hmm.
to replace them with.
I remember the Uncle Sam myself. That
Yeah.
was a great boat.
She was a great boat, yeah.
And how about, did you get a lot of business after the concerts, the Charles River
Oh, yeah,
concerts,
we'd wait.
Arthur Field?
We'd line up and wait for the concert to break, and then if it was a nice night, we'd fill the boats, maybe get 2 full trips.
Mm-hmm. That was many, many years
That
ago.
was 20 years ago, yes.
Yeah.
And Fiedler started there in 1928. I was there possibly 3 years before Fiedler came, so.
Imagine that. And so the taking of the West End affected you also, because
Very much so, yeah.
people from the West End used to enjoy your boat,
They
and that's
did.
another thing that was taken away from.
Yeah, it was.
What do you think of that taking of the West End? Were you-
Well, I'm a West Ender.
Sure.
That just speaks for itself. We had a wonderful, wonderful community. I lived and loved every hour I lived there.
And the camaraderie is still there.
It
from
still
the
is.
people.
It still is. We still meet people. We still have these different reunions where we meet. And
Mhm. And you have one recently at the old Blimstrom's.
at Blenstrup's, we have one every year. It's just a small group. About 100 of us meet there once a year. It's Ann Flamier is the one who organized it. Ann Flamier and Anna Marie Murdoch.
Okay.
They both organize this trip and this thing, and we have a nice time.
That's great. The West
Last
End
year
of
we
Florida.
had Jimmy Cando show up all the way from Florida to attend.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah.
And were you active in St. Joseph's Church also?
Yeah. I'm
Okay.
still.
You went to school, St.
I
Joseph's?
I graduated St. Joe's in 1925.
All right. And were you active in the community boathouse club also?
I was, yes. I was one of the. I was a charter member of community boating when I started,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd been active with Joe Lee. I first took my sailboat ride with Joe Lee, I believe, in 1923.
Mm-hmm.
Joe was a young man then, and we had a fleet of sailboats tied up at the Union Boat Club. They belonged to members, a fleet of 7 boats. And I guess all the boat owners were related to Joe Lee's. So Joe would come out and borrow when the boats were out sailing on it. Joe didn't care too much for them because they were, they were custom-built boats, and I'd say a stock-built boat. And Joe didn't care for them. He'd rather have a boat that he built himself or something he converted. So.
And on Charles Street, there was. Do you remember the sporting activities they had there along the Charles River? The races, the so forth and so on.
Yes, we had a boys' gymnasium and a girls' gymnasium, and they were both founded by Joe Lee's father. Believe it or not, he was the founder of the American Playground System. The boys' gymnasium, which is right down from Lever Street up to Poplar Street. We had a track there, we had handball court, baseball court. There were 2 tennis courts there. Joe Mack was the only one who ever played tennis in the West End. He was the only one who could afford a racket in those days, I guess. And then the girls' gym was well equipped. It had all types of gymnastics in the place, and that ran from Fruit Street to the West Boston Bridge.
Okay.
And then we had 3 public bathhouses that they used to bring into the Charles River. We called them bibbies.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the babies. I heard about them.
and,
Can you describe them for us?
Huh?
Can you describe them for us?
They were a boathouse with a sunken floor, and the floor was possibly 3.5, 4 feet deep. And you get in, it looked like an indoor swimming pool, but except they're all built of wood. We had 3 of them. One was located at the foot of Poplar Street. The girls' bathhouse was up at Fruit Street, And then there was one across on the Cambridge shore. These were towed in every spring, and people, most of us learned to swim there. We never realized, knew anything about water pollution or anything in those days. We all learned to swim there. There's all kinds of refuse in the water with us, but it didn't seem to bother. None of us ever get sick. Right?
The bibbies, that was your watering hole, huh?
Yeah, they were our watering hole, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And were you active in the Peabody House at all? Did you belong?
Not too much so. It's, we just, as kids, we played basketball in the Peabody House, and that was about it. Summer, I had my boat, so I never went off to camp or anything because I was always down the Charles River.
You had a story about Watsy's, about somebody used to come and play an instrument. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, yes, an old gentleman lived at corner of Spring and Allen Street. His name was Mr. Russo. He used to play a guitar. And then he had a young fellow, Cookie Miller, who was a singer, and they used to sing country western songs. And Mr. Russo, he couldn't even speak English, but he knew all the country western songs, and he'd sit there strumming away on his guitar, and Cookie Miller would sing the songs. And they were, Cookie was about 14, and Mr. Russo must have been 75 or 80 anyway. But they were a great team.
Mm-hmm. You remember some of your neighbors in the West End, in the houses you lived at? Do you recall any names?
Yes, when I first lived in the West End, the West End was mostly Jewish, believe it or not, and I lived in one house. I lived on Auburn Street. There were 10 families in the house. 8 were Jewish, and 2 were Irish Americans. There was the Shermans. Sam Sherman, you may know him. He was very active with Leo Haley later on in years when they were affiliated with the Boston Housing. I'm trying to think of some of the other people there.
There were many, many temples in the West End, too.
Quite a few temples.
Yeah.
We called them shuls in those days. And I knew them all because I had the contract every Friday night of lighting the candles and blowing them out after services were held. And in those days, most of the Jewish people in the West End were all Orthodox Jews, and they did no civil works from sundown Friday night till sunset Saturday night. So in winter time, we'd have to, what they called making a stove. We all had wood-burning, coal-burning stoves in our kitchens, and my jobs in the winter would be to go up and build a fire for them. Friday nights, I had 2 or 3 shuls in the West End where I used to have to go and light the candles on their altar and then put the candles out when the services were over. And I often wondered that the Jewish people couldn't do civil works, but to pick me up, and I was kind of a big kid, 10 or 11 years old, there was more work for them to pick me up to blow out the candle than was for them to blow out the candle.
That's amazing.
But they're wonderful people.
They were.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna head off to we have a tape we're gonna show of a 50th anniversary of the community boathouse that they held recently, and you attended that also.
Well.
So we're gonna break away for our tape. See you in a few minutes.
Sailboats on the Charles River Basin have become a part of the Boston scenery. At Community Boating, the Charles is a nautical playground for people of all races, ages, and backgrounds. As the first public sailing program in the country, Community Boating was a pioneer in breaking down the myth of sailing as an elitist sport. A little over 50 years ago, only private boat owners and college clubs could enjoy sailing on the Charles. But one man forged ahead into uncharted waters with a vision of sailing for all. The Charles has never been the same since. It all started in the 1930s in an area formerly known as the West End. The West End was adjacent to Beacon Hill, roughly between the North End and the Massachusetts General Hospital. A man named Joseph Lee Jr., who lived in the West End, had a passion for boating. People who knew Joe Lee were impressed by his motivation, persistence, and resourcefulness.
Joe Lee. And then I lost track of Joe for about 3 years. And he came through with a 28-foot pulling boat he bought from the Navy. A pulling boat with a large rowing whale boat. And Joe brought that up into the river. All they had on for equipment was just cross seats. Joe found 4 wagon wheels and lashed them to the seats. And then he cut down 4 trees, 4 saplings, and those were his masts. I don't know where he got the sails from, but that's when Joe started his first sailing program. So the first boat, he sailed one day and tied up at a pier over South Boston while he went ashore. When he come back, the kids had sunk the boat. They filled it with rocks. So that didn't hamper Joe one bit. Joe went out and bought himself another pulling boat and re-rigged it. He used to tie it up down below the bridge, right below West Boston Bridge.
Joe Lee occasionally would draft me into taking a canoe ride with him, an aluminum canoe, and come up the river, go up the river by paddling, and then come down the river with an umbrella as a means for sailing. And he'd have me standing up in the center of the boat, and I'd have to take the umbrella and sort of swivel myself and pitch it so I can catch the wind. That was some of my first sailing.
Joe Lee had another strong influence in his life. His father, Joseph Lee Sr., was known as the father of American playgrounds. So Joe Lee Jr. naturally extended the playground concept to the Charles River.
Joe Lee had just gotten through with a project that he had been very interested in economics. And he was casting about for something to do. And at that time, he lived up on the hill, and he used to look at the river. And this was in the early 30s, and he looked at the river and he'd say, look at all that good wind gone to waste. There must be some way to harness it and some way to get the people interested in sailing on the Charles River.
For those people that never met the man, I mean, it seems like he had a lot of idiosyncrasies, but Joe Lee, in my estimation, and knowing him for 50 years, and I'm sure the people here will agree with me, he was way ahead of his own time as far as interest in young people was concerned. He was interested in before it became fashionable.
In 1936, Joe Lee designed a sailboat that was relatively inexpensive and easy to assemble. The first 2 of its kind were built on the roof of an apartment in the West End. The boats were launched from Watsy's Landing, located in the lower basin, near where the Museum of Science stands today. All that remains of Watsy's now are 2 decaying tugboats and some shards of the old dock. But in its heyday, the landing witnessed the humble beginnings of community boating.
We're back live now. Captain Hughes. That was quite an anniversary party they had there at the community boathouse.
It really was. It was
Yeah.
a nice time.
Good. Now let's get to West End politics. You were very, very active in the West End politics in your heyday there, Captain.
And as young people, we loved politics. We were being a West Ender meant that you were involved in politics. We had the Hendricks Club, which was one of the oldest political organizations in the city of Boston, run by Martin Lamassany, who used to be a lamplighter. He used to walk around the West End lighting the gas lights with a little tool. And then he went political. He formed the Hendricks Club, and when you became 21 years of age, a person would knock at your door, hand you a key, and say, you owe us 25 cents for the key. And he said, what's this all about? Well, now you're a member of the Henry's Club. So, and we did very well. Martin was our god. If he said to vote for someone, we voted for him. And he did. He made governors, he made mayors, he made congressmen. And while Martin was alive, everybody was real close. They all stayed together. When Martin died, the Henry's Club broke up. There's 3 or 4 different factions. George Leary, he started the Shepherd Club. John Eifert still held on to the Henry's Club. But and then things began to, John I had been elected city council years and years and years and years.
That's John I. Fitzgerald.
John I. Fitzgerald, yeah. And he had been president of the city council, acting mayor 2 or 3, under Mansfield. He was acting mayor for almost 4 years. But then it became a turn, then Joe Russo ran against him. Joe defeated John I. for the council, which ended John I.'s career. Matter of fact, James Michael Curley was a fine person, but he was never endorsed by the Henry's Club for anything. Martin would not endorse Curley for anything. And my father was a strong Curley man, and I, being young and political minded, I didn't think that Curley was the right man to be mayor. We all thought he was a crook, and he may have stolen maybe $100 in his life, I don't know. But my father would say, someday you'll realize what a great man James Michael Curley was.
He was right, wasn't he?
He was. So then I got interested in politics at a young age. I was always supporting someone else. In 1952, I'm trying to think of the man's name. He'd been state senator for years and years. And before I get to him, I'll talk about Joe Langone.
Oh, the famous Langone family,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Everybody knows Langone.
Yeah. Joe Langone. The first Langone who ran for the Senate was Joe Langone's father. That would be the President Langone's grandfather. He was the senator. He was senator for 2 terms. Then his older son, Joe, decided he wanted to be senator, so he ran against his father for the job.
You're kidding? I never
and
knew that.
defeated him. Joe Langone, I think, was the most colorful man they ever had in the state senate. Between he and his father, they buried half of the deceased in Charlestown free of charge, and they built up a great Irish following. So it'd be pretty hard to defeat the Langones no matter what they did run for. Joe.
Then there was Freddie Langone, too. He ran for city council.
Yeah, Freddie's still alive.
Yeah, he was pretty colorful in the council.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
And Joe also.
Yeah, Joe, yeah.
You were part of a slate in the Kennedy era. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, when Jack Kennedy first ran for the United States Senate, Chip O'Neill ran for his job as congressman, and then that was 1952, and the seat was open on the state Senate from our district, so I was the candidate, and I was on the same platform with Jack Kennedy and Tip O'Neill, and we ran. Different groups would support the 3 of us, and we would go and make speeches at their times. But regardless, I ran against one of the greatest persons who was ever in the state Senate, Mario Yamana. And I ran against Mario twice. He beat me badly both times, but he was still a fine person. I told Mario I couldn't dig up any dirt against him when I was campaigning against him. But it never hurt me, and I never asked either he or Tip O'Neill for a favor for myself, but I have sent people to both Tip and Mario Yamana for little favors, and I never refused anyone I ever sent to them. So in 1958, the Secretary of State job was open, so I filed for that also, and we were doing pretty well, excepting Kevin White's father had become the political boss of Boston at the time. Curly had passed away, Martin had died, and there was no one around outside of Marcy Tobin. And so Kevin White's father, Dr. Joe White, he had been in the school committee all his life, which in those days was a gratis job. You received no pay. It's just a stepping stone. But Doc White, he stayed on the school, but became a very, very powerful man in Democratic politics in the state. So I was doing pretty well campaigning, but I had no money. And it started to cost money in those days to run for office. And so I stepped aside, and Kevin was elected Secretary of State. And that also never hurt me. Kevin always remembered that I did step out any time I needed a little favor. City Hall was always granted.
From there he moved on to become mayor of the city.
Mayor of the city, yes.
Many years.
3 terms of it. And a lot of people didn't like him, but I liked him.
Tell us about, there was a famous wiring hole there that a lot of politicians used to meet and socialize in Feeney's Cafe.
That was Bob Feeney's Grill, yes.
Tell us about that.
Bob Feeney's Cafe was on Cambridge Street. It was really a well-run liquor place. Bob Feeney himself was one of the finest persons you'd want to meet. And anyone who ever met Bob, they liked him. So his place automatically became a political headquarters. Mayors and governors all hung around in there. They meet, and it was a great place. When Bob died, his bar manager bought the place, and they moved off. But that was the time the West End was started. Bob, during Prohibition, Bob ran what we call the speakeasy there. But he ran the speakeasy like he ran his saloon. There was never any rough stuff. You never saw any bums or drunks hanging around, and he just ran a respectable place.
There's some famous people that used to go there.
There were some very famous people.
Carl Yastrzemski was one of them.
Yeah, Carl Yastrzemski was there. Ted Williams.
Can you recall some of the other political people used to go in?
Yes, I'm trying to think.
Curly? Did Curly go in?
No, I don't think Curly ever went in there. Curly never cared much for the West End. He never come down that district because he and Martin never got along, and in spite of the fact Curly used to pick up an enormous vote down there. But I'm trying to think of the governor, Morris Tobin. Was very
active.
Bob Feeney was supported when Morris ran for mayor.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Bob Feeney was one of his strongest supporters.
Well, Captain Hughes, you've been a very, very colorful person. You had quite a West End upbringing and quite a career there with the Boston Harbor Cruises and the Charles River Cruises and your political life, and you're a real West End legend.
Yeah. Well,
and we had a real interesting story to tell us, and we appreciate you being here today. So thank you very, very much for coming.
Oh, and thank you for inviting me, Joe.
Okay, and thank you, and see you at the next West End video newsletter.
Good.